Dad wore his old coat and a gentle smile, clutching a bottle of cheap wine. My in-laws mocked his calloused hands until his mother-in-law sneered, asking if he drove a truck to get that dirty. He remained polite. I kept smiling, but my thoughts turned ice cold. If they wanted to treat him like a joke, I would show them exactly who held the financial noose around their necks. My name is Marley Davis, and the first thing I noticed when we walked into the Mercer estate was the silence that felt heavy enough to choke on. The house in Clayton was a sprawling monument to old money and new pretensions, with ceilings that vanished into shadow and floors polished to a mirror shine that made you afraid to step too firmly. My hand was sweating in the grip of my husband, Dylan, but his palm was dry and cool. He was in his element here. I was the invader, and my father, Frank Davis, was the casualty we had brought along for the evening entertainment. The dinner had been billed as a family celebration, a casual gathering to toast the recent successes of the Mercer men, but the atmosphere in the dining room suggested an inquisition rather than a party. The air smelled of expensive potpourri and judgment. Dad stood in the entryway of the formal dining room, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing his best jacket, a navy blue blazer that he had bought at a department store sale 5 years ago. The elbows were slightly shiny from wear, and the cut was boxy, lacking the tailored precision of the suits worn by Ronan Mercer. My father-in-law. Dad held a bottle of wine against his chest like a shield. It was a Merlot he had picked up on the way over, the kind with a bright, colorful label that practically screamed grocery store bargain bin. He had peeled off the price tag, but I knew it had cost $12.99. He was smiling that gentle, unassuming smile of his, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look perpetually kind. It was the smile of a man who had spent 40 years fixing things that other people broke. A man who found joy in simple functionality. Gwen Mercer, my mother-in-law, glided over to us. She did not walk. She floated, propelled by a mixture of chiffon and superiority. Her eyes flicked over my father's outfit, dissecting the polyester blend of his slacks and the scuffs on his brown loafers in a single, surgical glance. "Frank," she said, her voice a melodic trill that hid the razor blade underneath. "You made it, and you brought refreshment." She took the bottle from him with 2 fingers, holding it away from her body as if it might leak toxic waste onto her silk blouse. She peered at the label, her eyebrows arching so high they threatened to disappear into her hairline. "How charmingly rustic," Gwen said. "Ronan, look. Frank has brought us a table wine. It will be such a fascinating contrast to the Cabernet we decanted earlier. Thank you, Frank. I will have the staff put this in the kitchen. For cooking, perhaps." "It is a good year," Dad said softly, his voice a little hoarse. He cleared his throat. "The clerk said it was very popular." "I am sure it is," Ronan said, stepping up beside Gwen. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, wearing a suit that cost more than my father's car. He clapped a hand on Dad's shoulder, a gesture that looked friendly but was actually a power move, a way of physically dominating the space. Quantity often has a quality all its own. "Right, Frank? Come, sit. We do not want to let the roast get cold while we discuss sommelier recommendations." I looked at Dylan, my husband, the man who had promised me that tonight would be different, that his parents would be welcoming. He was standing by the sideboard, pouring himself a drink. He saw the exchange. He saw the way his mother held the bottle like a dead rodent. He heard the condescension dripping from his father's voice, and he did nothing. "Actually, that is not fair. He did not do nothing," he chuckled. It was a dry, hollow sound, a laugh meant to signal to his parents that he was in on the joke, that he understood the absurdity of Frank Davis and his $12 wine. He caught my eye and offered a quick, pleading grimace, a silent request for me not to make a scene. "Keep the peace, Marley," his eyes said. "Do not ruin my promotion night." We took our seats. The table was set with enough silverware to perform a major surgery. Dad hesitated, his hand hovering over the array of forks, unsure which one to grab. I saw Sloane. Dylan's younger sister, nudge Gwen, and nod toward Dad's confused hand. They exchanged a look of amused pity. I deliberately picked up the wrong fork, the salad fork, and stabbed my appetizer with aggressive force, hoping Dad would follow my lead. He did, grateful for the cue. The conversation started with the usual Mercer boasting. Ronan talked about the market volatility and how he had cleverly navigated a hedge fund disaster that had ruined lesser men. Sloane talked about her upcoming trip to the Amalfi Coast, complaining about the difficulty of finding a private villa that could accommodate her entourage. Gwen presided over it all, directing the flow of talk like a conductor, ensuring that the spotlight remained firmly on the achievements of her bloodline. Then, inevitably, the spotlight turned to the outsider. "So, Frank," Gwen said, slicing her filet mignon with terrifying precision. "We rarely hear about your days. What have you been up to lately? Still tinkering away?" Tinkering was a word she used often for my father. It reduced his decades of hard labor and technical expertise to the level of a toddler playing with blocks. "Work is busy," Dad said. He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, careful not to leave a stain. "Lots of maintenance requests this quarter. The weather changes always mess with the HVAC systems in the older buildings." HVAC. Ronan repeated the acronym as if it were a foreign word he found distasteful. "That is heating and cooling. Correct? It must be exhausting work, crawling into tight spaces, dealing with grime." "It is honest work," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Dad manages the systems for half the commercial district downtown." "Manages?" Gwen echoed, smiling tightly. "Of course, but you are still hands-on, aren't you? Frank, I can tell." She gestured with her knife toward Dad's hands, which were resting on the white tablecloth. They were strong hands, thick-fingered and broad. The skin was weathered, mapped with the scars of slipped wrenches and hot pipes. They were the hands of a man who built the world that people like the Mercers merely occupied. But tonight, against the pristine damask, they looked rough. They looked out of place. "Your hands," Gwen clarified, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly across the table. "They are so textured. Is that grease under the nails? Or just permanent staining?" I felt the heat rise up my neck. I looked at Dad's hands. They were scrubbed raw. I knew he had spent 20 minutes in the bathroom before we left, using a pumice stone and heavy-duty soap to get them clean, but there were lines of darkness in the calluses that no amount of scrubbing could erase. It was oil and graphite and metal dust that had become part of his skin. "It is just wear and tear, ma'am," Dad said, his voice steady. He pulled his hands back from the table, resting them in his lap to hide them. "Comes with the territory." "You must be very strong," Sloane chirped, looking up from her phone. "Like those men in the Diet Coke commercials. Do you drive a truck? Mr. Davis? You have that look. Like you spend a lot of time in a truck stop." The table went silent. It was a direct shot, a classist jab wrapped in the guise of curiosity. I looked at Dylan again. "Dylan?" I said, my voice low. Dylan cleared his throat. "Sloane, don't be rude. Frank has been in the industry for 40 years. I am not being rude." Sloane feigned innocence. "I am asking about his career. Mom asked about his hands. I'm just trying to understand the context. Is it driving? Is it heavy lifting? What exactly do you do? Mr. Davis, that ruins your skin like that." Gwen leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with malicious delight. She wanted him to say it. She wanted him to admit he was a laborer, a blue-collar worker, someone beneath them. She wanted to establish the hierarchy once and for all before dessert was served. "Yes, Frank," Gwen purred. "Enlighten us. What is your official title these days? We want to know exactly what kind of work leaves a man looking so used." I opened my mouth to scream, to flip the table, to throw the $12 Merlot in her face, but Dad spoke first. "I ensure stability," Frank said. He did not look down. He looked directly at Ronan, then at Gwen. His eyes were clear and calm. devoid of the shame they were trying to force upon him. I handle the infrastructure. I make sure the lights stay on and the air stays clean. I do the things that help people sleep at night. For a second, the answer hung in the air. It was vague. It was dignified. Then, Ronan laughed. It was a barking, dismissive sound. "Help people sleep at night," Ronan exclaimed, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Oh, that is rich. Frank, you make it sound like you are in security or finance. You fix furnaces. You unclog drains. Let us call a spade a spade. You are a handyman, a glorified janitor with a tool belt." Gwen joined in, a tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Ronan, stop. You are embarrassing him." "But really, Frank, helping people sleep at night sounds like you are selling mattresses. We value your contribution. Of course, someone has to do the dirty work so the rest of us can focus on strategy and leadership." Dylan laughed too. He looked at his father, saw the approval in Ronan's eyes, and he laughed. He sold his wife's father for a moment of validation from a man who barely liked him. "It is a good line, Frank," Dylan said, grinning weakly. "I will have to remember that one." My heart turned into a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I looked at my father. He hadn't flinched. He simply picked up his water glass and took a sip. As he did, I looked down at his hand again. There, on the pad of his right thumb, was a smudge. It wasn't grease. It wasn't oil. It was a deep, indigo blue stain. I knew that stain. I had seen it 1,000 times growing up. It was from the cheap ballpoint pens he bought by the box, the ones that sometimes leaked if you pressed too hard. But he didn't use them for fixing furnaces. He didn't use them for unclogging drains. He used them for his ledger. He used them for signing documents. Gwen leaned over to Sloane, thinking the clatter of silverware covered her voice, but I was tuned into her frequency now. I heard every syllable. "The girl is lucky Dylan has such low standards," Gwen murmured, her lips barely moving. "Look at her father. He looks like the man who comes to read the meter and begs for a glass of water. He probably signs his name with an X on the utility bills." Sloane giggled, hiding her mouth behind her napkin. I looked at Gwen. I looked at her perfect hair, her diamond earrings, her smug satisfaction. I looked at Ronan, who was already bored with the sport of baiting my dad and had moved on to checking his watch. I looked at Dylan, who was avoiding my gaze, staring into his wine glass like a coward. And then I looked at the blue ink on my father's thumb. A strange calm washed over me. The anger didn't leave. It just crystallized. It hardened into something sharp and useful. They saw a man in a cheap jacket with rough hands. They saw a punchline. They saw a creature of a lower order. Someone they allowed at their table out of a misplaced sense of charity. They thought his vague answer about helping people sleep at night was a pathetic attempt to dress up a lowly existence. They had no idea. They didn't know that the infrastructure my father maintained wasn't just pipes and wires. They didn't know that the maintenance he performed wasn't on boilers, but on the massive, complex machinery of corporate finance that kept their entire lifestyle afloat. Gwen thought he looked like the man who signed utility bills. I took a slow sip of my water, masking the terrifying smile that wanted to break across my face. They did not know that the document my father had been signing all afternoon, the one that left that stubborn blue stain on his thumb, was not a utility bill. It was a payroll authorization transfer, and the names at the top of that payroll list were Ronan Mercer, Gwen Mercer, and Dylan Mercer. They were eating his food. They were drinking his wine, mocking it while they did. They were sitting in a house that, technically, his signature was paying the mortgage on this month. If they wanted to turn my father into a symbol of the working class, into a person of no consequence, I was going to let them. I would let them dig this hole so deep they would never see the sun again, because they didn't realize that the man they were mocking was the only thing standing between them and financial ruin. I set my glass down on the table with a soft click. "Is the wine really that bad?" "Gwen?" I asked, my voice light and conversational. "It is swill, darling," she said. waving her hand. But it was a sweet gesture. "I am glad you think so," I said. "Dad has always been generous, sometimes to a fault." Dad looked at me, a flicker of warning in his eyes. "Don't do it." "Marley," he seemed to say. "Not yet." I held his gaze and gave a microscopic nod. "Okay, Dad. Not yet. But soon. Very soon." I picked up my fork and took a bite of the steak. It was overcooked, and for the first time all night, I enjoyed the taste. It tasted like leverage. To understand why the silence at the Mercer dinner table felt so violent, you have to understand the noise of the home I grew up in. It was a small brick bungalow in a working-class pocket of South St. Louis, the kind of neighborhood where the porches were close enough that you could smell what your neighbor was cooking for dinner and hear the score of the Cardinals game drifting through the screen doors on summer nights. Our house was not quiet. It hummed. The radiator in the hallway clanged like a trapped animal every time the temperature dropped below 40 degrees. The floorboards in the kitchen groaned under the weight of the refrigerator. And there was always the sound of my father, Frank, moving through the space. My mother died when I was 7 years old. One day she was there, folding laundry and singing along to the radio, and the next, she was a gap in the universe that the air rushed to fill. Dad did not fall apart. He did not have the luxury of falling apart. He simply absorbed the silence she left behind and filled it with action. He worked double shifts at the auto shop, and on weekends, he picked up maintenance contracts for the older apartment complexes that the city had forgotten. I remember waiting up for him when I was 10. He would come through the back door, smelling of engine oil, sawdust, and the metallic tang of copper wire. His uniform would be stained with grease, dark patches on the gray fabric, but his face would light up when he saw me doing my homework at the kitchen table. He would go to the sink and scrub his hands with a bar of heavy-duty soap that smelled like pumice and lemon. He would scrub until the skin was raw and pink, until every trace of the day's labor was gone, before he would sit down and ask me about my math test. He taught me that dirt on the hands was temporary, but dirt on the soul was permanent. He told me that there was no shame in labor, only in doing a job halfway. He was the most competent man I have ever known. He could look at a broken boiler, listen to the way it rattled, and know exactly which valve was loose. He could look at a leaking roof and understand the geometry of the water flow. He was a mechanic, a janitor, a facility manager, and a father. And he did it all without a single complaint. But to the world outside our neighborhood, he was invisible. Or worse, he was a prop. I worked hard to get out of that neighborhood, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I saw how hard my father worked to keep us afloat, and I wanted to be the one to carry the load eventually. I studied business administration with a focus on operations management. While other girls in my dorm were rushing sororities, I was interning at a commercial real estate firm, learning the language of leases, vendor contracts, and facility logistics. I wanted to understand the systems that governed the buildings my father fixed. That was how I met Dylan. He was the junior leasing agent for a luxury development in Clayton. He walked into the project coordination meeting wearing a suit that fit him perfectly. His hair swept back in a way that looked effortless, but probably took 20 minutes to style. He was charming. He spoke with a confidence that I found intoxicating because it was so different from the quiet, stoic reliability of my father. Dylan was full of words. He could spin a delay in construction into a strategic pause. He could talk a furious tenant into renewing their lease. He was shiny and polished, and when he looked at me, I felt like I had been chosen. He told me he loved my drive. He said I was different from the girls he grew up with, the ones who went to private schools and spent their summers in the Hamptons. He called me authentic. At the time, I took it as a compliment. I did not realize that to him. I was a novelty, a bit of rough trade that he could polish up and present to the world as his own discovery. The first time he took me to meet his parents, 2 years ago, I felt the shift in the atmosphere the moment we crossed the threshold of their estate. It was winter, and the air inside the Mercer house was set to a perfect, sterile 72 degrees. There were no clanging radiators here. There was no smell of dinner cooking, just the faint scent of lilies and furniture polish. Ronan and Gwen Mercer were waiting in the living room. They did not stand up when we entered. Gwen offered me her cheek, her skin dry and papery, and Ronan shook my hand with a grip that was limp and dismissive. They asked me where I was from, and when I told them, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They asked about my parents. I told them my mother had passed and my father worked in facilities maintenance. I saw the look they exchanged. It was a microscopic tightening of the lips, a slight widening of the nostrils. It was the look one gives when they spot a stain on a restaurant tablecloth. It was not disgust, exactly. It was disappointment. They had expected Dylan to bring home someone from their world, or at least someone adjacent to it. Instead, he had brought home the daughter of the help. Facilities maintenance, Ronan had said, swirling his scotch. Useful work? Essential. Really, we use a service for that at my firm. He worked for Marrow Pike Management, a subsidiary of the massive Brightwell Facilities Group. He said the name of the company with a reverence usually reserved for religious deities. To Ronan, Marrow Pike was not just an employer, it was an identity. He was a senior vice president of strategy, a title that sounded impressive but, as I would later learn, mostly involved delegating actual work to people who knew what they were doing. We handled the premier accounts in the Midwest. Ronan had bragged that first night, his chest puffing out. High-level asset management. We do not deal with the gritty details. Of course, we handle the big picture, the vision. He looked at me when he said it, implying that my world, my father's world, was small and dirty, while his was vast and clean. I introduced them to Dad a month later. We met at a neutral location, a steakhouse downtown that was nicer than what Dad was used to, but not so fancy that he would feel uncomfortable. Dad wore his Sunday suit. He had polished his shoes. He was nervous. The Mercers arrived 15 minutes late. They breezed in, complaining about the valet service, and barely looked at my father when he stood up to greet them. "Frank, is it?" Ronan asked, not waiting for an answer. "Dylan tells us you are in the repair business." "I manage building operations," Dad said softly. "Right, repairs," Ronan corrected him, as if he knew better. Throughout that meal, I watched them dismantle my father's dignity with surgical precision. They used words he didn't know. They talked about vacations to places he couldn't pronounce. They asked him questions about the economy and then interrupted him before he could answer, pivoting back to their own investments. And Dad just sat there. He listened. And then, he did the thing that I had seen him do 1,000 times at our kitchen table. He pulled a small, battered black notebook from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was a cheap thing, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $2. He clicked his ballpoint pen and wrote something down. "Taking notes." "Frank," Gwen asked, arching an eyebrow, "is there going to be a quiz?" "Just a habit," Dad said. He didn't look up. He just kept writing, his hand moving steady and sure across the paper. I assumed he was writing down a reminder to check a boiler, or maybe the name of the wine so he could look it up later. I was so busy trying to manage the conversation, trying to shield him from their barbs, that I didn't pay enough attention to the pen. For 2 years, I tried to bridge the gap. I changed the way I dressed. I stopped wearing the hoop earrings I loved and started wearing simple pearl studs. I learned to distinguish between a Pinot Noir and a Malbec. I learned to laugh quietly, to nod at the right times, to ignore the casual classism that permeated every conversation at the Mercer dinner table. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that Dylan was the prize, and his family was just the tax I had to pay. As long as Dylan loves me, I repeated like a mantra, as long as we are a team, but we weren't a team. I saw that now. Over the last 24 months, Dylan had slowly drifted from the charming rebel who loved my authenticity to a carbon copy of his father. He stopped defending me when Gwen made comments about my thrifty habits. He started rolling his eyes when I told stories about growing up in the city. He began to treat my father not with respect, but with a tolerated amusement, like one treats a well-behaved pet. And tonight was the culmination of it all. Tonight, sitting at their table, listening to them reduce my father's life of hard work and sacrifice to a joke about dirty hands. Something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was quiet, like a support beam finally giving way under years of stress. I looked at Ronan, puffing on his cigar, talking about the exclusive restructuring happening at Marrow Pike. He spoke as if the company was his personal kingdom, as if his position there was divinely ordained. He had no idea that the structure he stood on was shifting. I looked at my father. He was watching Ronan too. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't ashamed. He had his hand in his pocket, touching that notebook. He was the smartest man in the room, and they were too blinded by their own reflection to see it. I had spent 2 years trying to be a mercer. I had tried to scrub the St. Louis grit off my skin to fit into their Clayton mold. But as I watched Gwen sneer at the man who had taught me everything I knew about honor, I realized I didn't want to be a mercer. I didn't want their cold, polished surfaces. I wanted the heat. I wanted the noise. And most of all, I wanted the reckoning. My father had taught me how to fix things. But he had also taught me that sometimes, before you can build something new, you have to completely demolish the rotting structure that stands in your way. I looked at the stain on his thumb again. The ink was dark and permanent. I was done trying to be accepted. It was time to start accepting the reality of who held the power. And it wasn't the man boasting about his title at the head of the table. It was the man with the notebook, quietly calculating the cost of their arrogance. The bill was coming due, and I was going to be the one to deliver it. The primary reason for this gathering was ostensibly to celebrate Dylan. Earlier that afternoon, he had received the preliminary notification that he was on the shortlist for a senior director position within his division. It was a role that came with a corner office, a significant salary bump, and most importantly to the Mercers, a title that sounded impressive at cocktail parties. The dining room had been staged for a coronation. Crystal stemware caught the light from the chandelier, refracting it into sharp, blinding prisms on the white tablecloth. Gwen had orchestrated the seating arrangements with the tactical precision of a general isolating an enemy combatant. The table was long, a mahogany expanse that could easily seat 12. Though there were only 6 of us, Ronan sat at the head, naturally, with Gwen opposite him. Dylan and I were placed on one side, close to Ronan, creating a tight nucleus of power. Sloane sat across from us, and then there was my father. Gwen had placed Frank at the very end of the table, on the same side as Sloane but separated from her by 2 empty chairs. He was marooned. To speak to him, anyone else had to raise their voice slightly, turning a casual comment into a proclamation. It forced him to lean forward, straining to hear, which gave him the appearance of being perpetually eager to please. It was a subtle, architectural humiliation. The first course was a chilled cucumber soup that tasted faintly of metal. I watched Dad pick up his spoon. He waited until Gwen had started eating, a habit of politeness he had drilled into me since I was a child. He took a small sip, his face unreadable. "So, Frank," Ronan boomed from the head of the table. He did not look at my father. He was busy buttering a roll. "Dylan tells us you never went to university. Is that correct?" The question was not a conversation starter. It was a deposition. Dad placed his spoon down gently. "That is right. I went straight to work after high school. My father got sick, and the family needed the income." "Admirable," Ronan said, though the word sounded like an insult. Though I suppose it limits one's ceiling. I always say that higher education is not just about the degree. It is about learning how to think, how to process complex, abstract concepts. Do you find yourself struggling with the bigger picture sometimes? Frank, without that foundation. I gripped my napkin under the table. Dad has run his own life successfully for 40 years. Ronan, I think he understands the big picture just fine. I am asking Frank. Darling, Ronan said, waving a hand at me dismissively. I learn by doing, Dad said. His voice was calm, devoid of defensiveness. Books are good, but sometimes you have to get your hands on the machine to understand why it is making that noise. Sloane let out a short, sharp giggle. The machine, she repeated to herself, as if it were the funniest thing she had heard all week. Gwen signaled for the wine to be poured. It was a vintage red, thick and dark. The server filled Ronan's glass. then Gwen's, then moved to Dad. Dad placed his hand over the rim of the glass. "No, thank you," he said. "I am driving." "Oh, come on. Frank," Gwen said. "One glass won't hurt. Unless, oh, I suppose you are more of a beer man. We might have a can of something domestic in the back of the pantry, left over from the contractors who did the patio. Water is fine. Thank you," Dad said. "It is a $200 bottle," Gwen pressed, smiling tightly. "It has notes of dark cherry and tobacco, but I suppose if your palate is not developed, it might just taste like grape juice to you. It takes a certain exposure to appreciate the complexities of a Bordeaux." "I appreciate simplicity," Dad replied. He lifted his water glass. "It is clear. You know exactly what it is." They hated that. They wanted him to be embarrassed. They wanted him to stutter or apologize for his lack of sophistication. Instead, he was owning his preferences with a quiet dignity that made their extravagance look desperate. "Have you ever been to Europe, Frank?" Sloane asked suddenly. She was twirling a lock of hair around her finger, looking at him with feigned curiosity. "I am going to Italy next month. You know, to find myself. Have you ever traveled?" "Like, really traveled?" "I have been to Kansas City," Dad said. "And I went to Chicago once for a trade show." Sloane's eyes widened theatrically. "Chicago? Wow, that is exotic. You have never seen the Louvre. You have never had pasta in Florence." "I have not had the opportunity," Dad said. "That is so sad." Sloane sighed, turning to Dylan. "Isn't that sad? Dylan, imagine living your whole life and never leaving the Midwest. It is like being in a cage." "Some people have responsibilities." "Sloane," I said, my voice rising. "Not everyone can take 3 weeks off to find themselves on their parents' credit card." "Marley," Dylan warned. He put a hand on my forearm, his fingers digging in slightly. "Do not start." "She is just asking a question," Gwen added. "It is a valid cultural inquiry. We are just trying to get to know your father better. He is such a mystery." I looked over at Sloane. She had lost interest in the conversation and was holding her phone under the edge of the table. The camera lens was angled sharply to her left, toward the empty chairs, toward the floor beneath where my father was sitting. I glanced down. Dad was wearing his dress shoes. They were brown leather, well polished, but they were old. The leather was creased deep across the toe box, and the heels were worn down on the outside edge. They were the shoes of a man who walked miles every day, not a man who sat in a leather chair. Sloane's thumb moved rapidly across her screen. I felt a vibration in my pocket, a notification. I carefully pulled my phone out of my clutch and kept it in my lap. I opened the social media app. There, at the top of my feed, was a new story from Sloane. It was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my father's shoes resting on the expensive Persian rug. The caption, written in a loopy, sarcastic font, read, "Vintage Aesthetic," or just tragic dinner guest's charity case. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Sloane. She was smirking at her screen, waiting for the likes to roll in. I looked at Dylan. He had his phone out too. He was checking his emails. Or maybe he was looking at the same photo. He didn't look up. He didn't frown. He just swiped past it. "So, Dylan," Ronan said, his voice booming again, reclaiming the room. "Let us talk about this promotion. The compensation package. Have they sent over the details?" Dylan straightened up, relieved to be back on safe ground. "Not officially, but the base is solid, and the equity options are significant." "And the bonus structure?" Ronan asked. "That is where the real money is. You know, base salary is for paying the bills. Bonuses are for building the empire." "Target is 30%, Dylan said proudly. 30%. Ronan nodded, clearly calculating. "Not bad. At Marrow and Pike, we structure our executive bonuses on a sliding scale based on operational efficiency. Last year, my performance multiplier was 1.5. It resulted in a payout that was substantial." He turned his gaze back to the end of the table. "You know what a KPI is, don't you? Frank?" Dad looked up from his soup. Key performance indicator. Oh, look at that, Ronan chuckled. He knows the lingo, but knowing the acronym and understanding the pressure are two different things. In my world, Frank, if we do not hit the numbers, heads roll. It is a high-stakes environment. We manage millions of dollars in facility assets. We have to squeeze every ounce of value out of the vendors. We have to cut the fat. He gestured with his knife. I imagine in your line of work, the stakes are a bit lower. If you don't fix a toilet in time, someone gets annoyed. If I don't hit my targets, the stock price wobbles. It is a different universe. Someone like you probably cannot grasp the stress of living by the quarterly report. I understand accountability, Dad said. Sure, Ronan waved him off. But not at this level. Not at the level where you are responsible for the livelihoods of thousands of people. That is the burden of leadership. Frank, that is what Dylan is stepping into. It is a heavy crown. It must be, Dad said. I looked at Dad. He wasn't eating. He was watching Ronan with an expression I knew well. It was the look he gave a piece of machinery that was making a strange noise, diagnosing the fault, calculating the repair. Ronan was boasting about squeezing vendors and cutting fat to the very man who owned the holding company that audited Ronan's entire division. Ronan was bragging about his bonus to the man whose signature authorized the release of those funds. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout. He is your boss. He owns you. But I didn't. I looked at Dylan. Dylan, I said softly, maybe we can change the subject. Dylan looked at me, annoyed. Why Dad is just giving me advice? This is important for my career. Marley, it feels like we are excluding my father, I said. Dylan sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. Frank is fine, aren't you? Frank, you don't mind us talking shop? Not at all, Dad said. It is very educational. See, Dylan said to me. Stop being so sensitive. He is enjoying it. Dylan turned back to his father, eager to discuss stock options. He had made his choice. He had chosen the shiny, hollow approval of his father over the dignity of his wife and father-in-law. He was preserving the peace of the Mercer household by sacrificing us. The main course was cleared. The conversation drifted to the summer house the Mercers were planning to buy in the Ozarks. They talked about square footage and boat docks, completely ignoring the man at the end of the table who had lived in the same 3-bedroom bungalow for 30 years. Excuse me, Dad said quietly. I need to use the restroom. Down the hall. Second door on the left, Gwen said, not looking up from her plate. Dad stood up. He smoothed his jacket, adjusted his tie, and walked out of the room. His gait was slightly stiff. His knee was bothering him again. I could tell, but he held his head high. As soon as he turned the corner and his footsteps faded on the hardwood floor, the atmosphere at the table shifted. It became looser, more conspiratorial. Gwen leaned in toward the center of the table. She picked up her wine glass and swirled the dark liquid. Honestly, Marley, she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that was meant to be heard. I do hope he is careful in there. We just had those guest towels imported from Turkey. They are white, pure white. She took a sip of wine, her eyes locking with mine over the rim of the glass. Tell him to be careful not to wipe his hands on them if he hasn't gotten all that whatever it is off of his skin. I would hate to have to throw them away. Grease is so impossible to get out of linen. Sloane snorted. Maybe we should have put out paper towels. You know, like they have at gas stations. He would feel more at home. Ronan chuckled. Now, let us be charitable. The man is trying. Is he? Gwen asked. He sits there like a stone. He contributes nothing. It is like having the gardener join us for dinner. It ruins the aesthetic. My hand was resting on the table. I looked at my knuckles. They were white. I looked at the piece of roast beef on my plate. It was cold now. The gravy had congealed into a skin. Everything in me wanted to explode. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to pull up the photo Sloane had posted and shove it in her face. I wanted to tell Gwen that her precious Turkish towels cost less than the tax Dad paid on his quarterly dividends. I wanted to shatter their delusions right there and then. But then I thought about the blue ink on my father's thumb. I thought about the notebook in his pocket. If I screamed now, I would just be the hysterical daughter-in-law. I would be the emotional one. They would dismiss me. They would laugh about it later how Marley had a breakdown because they were too sophisticated for her father. Reaction was weakness. Silence was strategy. I picked up my fork. I stabbed the cold piece of meat. "You are right, Gwen," I said. My voice was steady. It was so calm it frightened me. "I will remind him. We wouldn't want to ruin anything valuable." I put the meat in my mouth and chewed. It tasted like ash. I smiled at my husband, who was busy pouring himself another glass of wine, oblivious to the fact that his wife had just declared war. They could have this dinner. They could have their jokes. They could have their Turkish towels and their phantom bonuses. I wasn't going to fight them at the dinner table. I was going to fight them in the one place they worshipped. I was going to fight them in the ledger. And when I was done, they wouldn't just be broke. They would be obsolete. The decision settled in my stomach, heavier and more satisfying than the meal. The play was over. The work was about to begin. The walk to the driveway felt like a funeral procession for a relationship that wasn't quite dead yet, but was certainly gasping for air. The air outside the Mercer estate was crisp and smelled of damp earth and manicured ivy, a sharp relief from the stifling scent of potpourri and expensive perfume inside. I walked beside my father, matching his stride. The gravel crunched loudly under my heels, the only sound in the suffocating quiet of the neighborhood. Dad stopped at his car. It was a 10-year-old sedan, reliable, American-made, and clean, parked next to Ronan's gleaming imported SUV and Dylan's sports coupe. It looked humble. It looked like an interloper. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to grab his arm and tell him that I was sorry for the way they spoke to him, sorry for the way they looked at his shoes, sorry for the way I had sat there and let the insults land like physical blows. But the words stuck in my throat, blocked by a lump of shame so dense I could barely breathe. Dad opened his car door, the hinges giving a soft squeak that seemed deafening in the silence. He didn't get in immediately. He turned to me, resting his hand on the roof of the car. The street lamp overhead cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of age and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. "Are you okay, Marley?" he asked. The question hit me harder than any of Gwen's snide remarks. After 2 hours of being treated like a servant, mocked for his education, and sneered at for his clothes, his only concern was for me. He wasn't thinking about his own bruised ego. He was checking on his daughter. "Am I okay?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "Dad, they were awful. They treated you like dirt. I am so sorry." He shook his head slightly, a dismissal of the entire evening. "I have been treated worse by better people," he said calmly. "It is just noise, Marley, empty noise, but you have to live with it. I get to go home. Are you safe here? With him?" He looked past me, toward the house where Dylan was still lingering in the doorway, probably saying a final goodbye to his parents, or apologizing for our early exit. "I am fine," I lied. "Dylan is just stressed about the promotion." Dad studied my face for a long moment. He knew I was lying, but he also knew that he couldn't force me to admit it. He nodded. "Once? Keep your eyes open," he said. It wasn't a casual piece of advice. It was an instruction. Smart girls get in trouble when they stop looking at the details. He got in the car, the engine catching on the first turn of the key. As he drove away, his taillights fading into the darkness of Clayton, I felt a sudden, terrifying isolation. I was alone behind enemy lines. The drive back to our townhouse was excruciating. Dylan drove aggressively, accelerating too fast from stop signs, his grip on the steering wheel tight. I stared out the passenger window, watching the blur of suburban wealth pass by. "You were quiet leaving," Dylan said finally, breaking the silence. His tone wasn't apologetic, it was accusatory. "I didn't have much to say," I replied, not turning to look at him. "You are being dramatic," he sighed, shaking his head. "My parents were just trying to be funny. You know how they are. They have a dry sense of humor. You need to stop being so sensitive. I whipped my head around to face him. Sensitive Dylan, your mother asked if my father drove a truck because his hands were dirty. Your sister posted a picture of his shoes on the internet to mock him. That is not humor. That is cruelty. They are just curious, Dylan snapped. They don't know people like Frank. It is a culture clash. You can't expect them to understand the blue-collar thing immediately. And honestly, Marley, your dad didn't help. He sat there like a statue. If he had just engaged a little, joked back, it would have been fine. So it is his fault, I asked, my voice rising. It is his fault they humiliated him. Nobody was humiliated, Dylan shouted, slapping the steering wheel. God, you make everything such a big deal. Ronan likes him. He said Frank was authentic. That is a compliment coming from him. I looked at my husband. In the dashboard lights. He looked like a stranger. Or maybe he looked exactly like the man he had always been. And I was just finally seeing him without the filter of infatuation. He wasn't defending the peace. He was defending his inheritance. He was defending his proximity to power. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. When we got inside our townhouse, a place that I had bought with my own savings and a small loan from Dad 3 years before I even met Dylan, the air felt stagnant. Dylan immediately went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. I was taking off my heels in the hallway when his phone rang. It wasn't the standard ringtone. It was the specific chime he had assigned to his mother. I watched him from the shadows of the hallway. He looked at the screen, and his posture changed instantly. The aggression vanished, replaced by a deferential slump. He didn't answer it in the kitchen. He glanced toward the stairs, checking to see where I was, then quickly walked into the sunroom, sliding the glass door shut behind him. I didn't go upstairs. I took off my shoes and crept across the living room rug in my stocking feet. I pressed myself against the wall next to the sunroom door. The glass wasn't soundproof. Yes, Mom, Dylan said. His voice was muffled but audible. I know. It was a disaster, no. She is upset I am handling it. A pause. I could hear the tinny sound of Gwen's voice on the other end, rapid fire and shrill. I know the timeline, Dylan said, sounding irritated now. I told Ronan I would get it done. If we want to secure the buy-in for the partnership track, I need the liquidity. I know, yes, she is pliable. She feels guilty about tonight. I can use that. My blood ran cold, pliable. I will talk to her tomorrow, Dylan continued. Once she calms down, I will bring up the refinancing. The townhouse is the only asset with enough equity. Yes, I know it is in her name. That is why I need to be smart about it. Okay, love you too. He hung up. I moved backward, stepping silently until I was back in the hallway. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just about classism. This wasn't just about them thinking they were better than us. This was a robbery in progress. Dylan walked out of the sunroom a moment later. He saw me standing by the stairs. I am going to take a shower, he said, his face a mask of exhaustion. We can talk in the morning. Let us just reset. Okay. Okay, I said. My voice sounded hollow, detached. He kissed me on the forehead, a kiss that felt like a brand of ownership, and went upstairs. I waited until I heard the water running in the master bathroom. I walked into the kitchen. Dylan's work laptop was sitting on the island, charging. It was a sleek, silver machine provided by his company. We shared it sometimes for streaming movies or booking flights, so I knew the passcode. It was his birthday. I opened the lid. The screen came to life. I typed in the numbers. My fingers trembled slightly as I navigated to his email client. I wasn't a snoop. I respected privacy, but the word pliable was echoing in my head, overriding every ethical boundary I had ever set for myself. I typed Ronan into the search bar. Dozens of emails popped up. Most were mundane work threads, forwarded jokes, or scheduling updates, but there was one thread near the top, dated 2 days ago, with the subject line, Financial Structuring. Partnership Buy-in. I clicked it. The email from Ronan was short and direct. Dylan, per our discussion, The restructuring of the comp package requires a buy-in to the partner pool. It is a standard procedure for the executive tier. The amount is $200,000. I know you are liquid on the cash front, but you need to show asset stability. The townhouse in Clayton is valued at $450,000. Since it is premarital, you need to get her to sign a quitclaim or refinance with you as a co-borrower to pull the equity out. If we convince Marley it is for the family future, we have leverage. We need this done before the quarter closes. The board is watching. I felt sick. They wanted my house, the house I had worked double shifts to buy, the house my father had helped me renovate with his own 2 hands. They wanted me to refinance it, hand over the cash for Dylan's buy-in, and effectively tie my financial survival to his career. But it was the next email in the chain that made me freeze. Dylan had replied, "I am working on it. It is delicate. What about the audit rumors? Is the buy-in safe?" And Ronan's response, "Ignore the noise. The audit is just a formality from the parent company. Brightwell Facilities Group does this every 3 years to justify their fees. We just need to move the assets around so the balance sheet looks heavy on investment and light on operational debt. Once the Brightwell auditor signs off, we are clear. Brightwell." The word seemed to jump off the screen. Brightwell Facilities Group. I stared at the name. It felt familiar, like a song I had heard in childhood but couldn't quite place. I closed my eyes, searching my memory. Why did I know that name? And then it hit me. Months ago, I had visited Dad at his small office in the back of the machine shop. His desk was covered in paperwork. I had picked up a binder to move it so I could set down my coffee, and he had gently taken it from my hand. "Careful with that," he had said. "That is the Brightwell Compliance Report. Confidential." At the time, I thought nothing of it. Dad managed facilities. Brightwell was a massive conglomerate. It made sense he would have their manuals or reports. But Ronan's email spoke of Brightwell as the parent company, the entity that conducted audits, the entity that Ronan was trying to hide money from. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I took photos of the emails, every single one in the thread. I made sure the timestamps and the sender names were clear. Then, for good measure, I forwarded the entire chain to a generic Gmail account I had created years ago for junk mail, one that Dylan didn't know existed. I closed the laptop and wiped the touchpad with my sleeve to remove my fingerprints. I needed to know. I walked out to the back patio. The night air was freezing, but I didn't feel it. I dialed my father's number. It was nearly 11 o'clock. Dad was usually asleep by 10, but he answered on the second ring. "Marley." His voice was alert. "Is everything all right?" "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low, "I have a question, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Ask me," he said. "Do you know a company called Brightwell Facilities Group?" There was a silence on the other end. It lasted for 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I could hear the hum of his refrigerator in the background. "Yes," he said. His voice was different now. It wasn't the voice of the gentle father who fixed my bike. It was the voice of a man who commanded attention. "Why do you ask?" "I saw an email," I whispered. "Dylan and Ronan. They are talking about a buy-in. They mentioned an audit from Brightwell. Dad Ronan is terrified of this audit." "Is he?" Dad said. The tone was dry, unreadable. "Dad, what is your connection to Brightwell? You had that binder on your desk. Are you a contractor for them?" "Marley," he said, his voice cutting through the phone line like a knife. "Do not say another word about this over the phone, not on your line, and not on his." "But, listen to me," he commanded. "Go to sleep. Act normal. Meet me tomorrow at the diner on 4th Street, the one near the old factory, 11 o'clock. Come alone." "Dad, you are scaring me," I said. "I am not trying to scare you," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "I am trying to protect you. They are not just mean people, Marley. They are careless, and careless people are dangerous when they are cornered." "Okay," I breathed. "I will be there." "And Marley?" "Yeah." "Don't sign anything," he said. "If he puts a piece of paper in front of you tonight, or tomorrow morning, do not sign it." "I won't," I said. He hung up. I stood there in the dark, clutching my phone. The pieces were starting to click together, forming a picture that was far more terrifying than a bad family dinner. The insults, the mockery, the classist jabs, they weren't just the behavior of snobs. They were a distraction. They were a smokescreen designed to make me feel small, to make me feel lucky to be there, so that when they handed me a pen and asked me to sign away my house, I would do it just to please them. They were testing my compliance. They were testing my breaking point. I looked up at the bedroom window where Dylan was showering, washing away the stress of the day, confident that his plan was working. He thought he had a pliable wife. He thought he had a foolish father-in-law. He had no idea that he had just armed the bomb that was going to blow his entire world apart. I went back inside, locked the door, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt like the owner, and I was about to start the eviction process. The morning after the dinner, I did not go to work. I called in sick, feigning a migraine that was only half a lie. The pounding in my head was real, but it was not caused by biology. It was caused by the sudden, violent realignment of my reality. While Dylan left for the Marrow and Pike offices, whistling as he adjusted his tie, confident that his plan to leverage my assets was in motion, I was already initiating a countermaneuver. I drove to a small, nondescript office building on the edge of the city, far away from the glass and steel canyons of Clayton. This was the domain of Carmen Delaney. Carmen was a family law attorney who had handled my mother's estate years ago. She was not the kind of lawyer who had mahogany desks and assistants who brought you sparkling water. She was the kind of lawyer who had piles of files on the floor and a brain that worked like a bandsaw. Carmen did not offer me sympathy when I sat down. She did not offer me a tissue. She simply held out her hand for the documents. I handed her the printouts of the emails between Dylan and Ronan, along with a summary of our assets I had compiled at 3 a.m. Carmen put on her reading glasses. The room was silent for 5 minutes, save for the rhythmic sound of her turning pages and the hum of the air conditioner. "He calls you pliable," Carmen said, not looking up. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," I said. "And he wants you to refinance a premarital asset to fund a buy-in for a partnership that might not even exist yet," she continued. She finally looked up, taking off her glasses. "This is not just ambitious, Marley. This is predatory." "Is it illegal?" I asked. "Conspiring to pressure a spouse into financial ruin isn't a crime in the statutory sense. Not yet," Carmen said, leaning back in her creaking chair. "But it is certainly grounds for a very aggressive divorce settlement. However, we need to be careful. If you file now, he will claim he was just discussing business options with his father. He will paint you as paranoid. We need more." She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her. "We are going to run a forensic audit of your marriage," Carmen said, clicking her pen. "Right now, today, you need to separate your digital life from his immediately. Do you share passwords?" "Some," I admitted. "Change them," she ordered. "All of them. Email, social media, banking, especially banking. Do you have a joint account?" "Yes, for household expenses. We deposit a percentage of our paychecks into it. Open a new account at a different bank today," Carmen instructed. "Route your direct deposit there. Leave the joint account active so he doesn't panic. But stop feeding it more than the bare minimum. And Marley, I need you to run a full credit report on yourself and on him. You are legally entitled to view the details of any joint liability." I spent the next hour in her office, using my laptop to dissect the financial skeleton of my marriage. It was a cold, clinical process. I felt like a coroner examining a body that I used to love. I changed the password to my primary email. I enabled 2-factor authentication on my investment accounts. I created a digital inventory of every piece of jewelry, every electronic device, and every piece of furniture I had brought into the marriage. Then, I ran the credit reports. My report was clean. My score was excellent, a testament to the lessons my father had taught me about debt. Then I ran the search for liabilities linked to our shared address. Nothing unusual popped up, just the car lease and the credit cards we paid off every month. "Check his name," Carmen suggested, pointing her pen at the screen. But don't use your home address. Use his parents' address. Use the Mercer estate. I hesitated. Why would he use their address? Because people who hide things usually hide them in the places they feel safest, Carmen said. I typed in Dylan's social security number and the address in Clayton. I hit enter. The loading circle spun for a few seconds, mocking me. When the results populated, my breath hitched in my throat. There, sitting at the top of the list, was a personal, unsecured loan from a private lending firm I had never heard of. The principal amount was $75,000. The origination date was 6 months ago. The current balance was still $74,000. He had barely touched the principal. $75,000, I whispered. Carmen, he took out a loan for $75,000. Why, he makes good money. We don't have debt. Carmen leaned over and looked at the screen. Look at the interest rate. Marley. I looked. It was 18%. That is panic money, Carmen said grimly. You don't take a loan at 18% unless you are desperate or stupid. And since he is trying to get $200,000 from you for a buy-in, I am guessing he is trying to use your money to pay off this secret debt before anyone finds out. Gambling, I asked, feeling sick. Maybe, Carmen said, or bad investments. Or maybe he is just living beyond his means to keep up with his parents. It is financial coercion. Marley, he is drowning, and he is trying to use you as a life raft. If you sign that refinance paperwork, he will take your equity, pay off his secret debt, and leave you with the mortgage. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. I thought about the dinner. I thought about Ronan mocking my father's cheap wine. I thought about Dylan laughing along, all the while. Dylan was $75,000 in the hole, hiding the statements at his parents' house. They were all in on it. They had to be. If the mail was going there, Gwen and Ronan knew. What do? I asked. You do exactly what he expects, Carmen said, her voice hard. You smile, you nod, you tell him you are considering the refinance, you tell him you need a few days to get the paperwork together, you buy us time. I need to subpoena these loan documents. I need to build a wall around your townhouse so high he can never climb it. But you cannot let him know you know. The moment he realizes you are on to him, he will destroy evidence. You have to be the actress of your life for the next week. I left Carmen's office with a headache that had evolved into a cold, sharp clarity. I had my instructions. I needed to see the one person who would understand this. I drove back toward the city, but I didn't go home. I went to the south side, to a neighborhood that smelled of brewing hops and river water. I pulled into the parking lot of the Iron Skillet, a diner that had been there since the 1950s. It was a place with vinyl booths that had been patched with duct tape and waitresses who called you honey without irony. It was the anti-Mercer estate. I walked in. The bell above the door jingled. The air smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee. I saw him immediately in the back booth. Dad was wearing his work clothes, a gray uniform shirt with his name stitched over the pocket. He was reading a newspaper. A pair of reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked comfortable here. He looked solid. I slid into the booth opposite him. He folded the newspaper and set it aside. You look pale, he said. I know everything. I said. I didn't whisper, but I kept my voice low. Or at least, I know enough. Dylan has a secret debt. $75,000. He's trying to take my house to cover it, and Ronan is helping him. Dad nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised. He signaled the waitress, a woman named Betty, who had known me since I was in braces. Coffee for the lady, Betty, Dad said, and a slice of the cherry pie. She needs sugar. You got it, Frank, Betty said, winking at me. When she left, Dad reached into his shirt pocket. He didn't pull out a wrench or a receipt. He pulled out a small, cream-colored business card. It was thick stock, high quality. He slid it across the chipped Formica table. I picked it up. It was minimalist. No logo. Just text in a clean, serif font. Davis Holdings. Frank Davis. Managing partner. There was a phone number and an email address I didn't recognize. "Dad," I said, looking up at him. "What is this?" "I told you I fix things," Dad said, wrapping his hands around his mug. "For a long time, I fixed things with a hammer, but about 15 years ago, I realized that the people hiring me were charging 10 times what they paid me, so I started buying." "Buying what?" "Small companies," he said. "At first, a plumbing supply distributor, a commercial cleaning service. I bought them when they were failing, fixed the operations, and made them profitable. I didn't change my lifestyle because I wanted to reinvest the profits. I wanted to build something real." He took a sip of coffee. "Then, about 5 years ago, I started buying stock. I looked for companies that were heavy on management and light on actual work, companies that were bloated, like Brightwell." My eyes widened. "You own Brightwell stock." "I don't just own stock, Marley," he said calmly. "Through Davis Holdings, I am the majority shareholder of the voting trust that controls Brightwell Facilities Group, which means I own the company that owns Marrow and Pike." I stared at him, the man sitting across from me, in a grease-stained shirt, eating lunch at a $10 diner, was technically the boss of Ronan Mercer. "But why?" I stammered. "Why do you still work? Why do you let them treat you like that?" "Because I like working," Dad said simply. "I like fixing pipes. It keeps me honest. And as for the Mercers," he leaned forward, and for a moment, the kind, gentle father I knew was replaced by something much more formidable. His eyes were hard like flint. "I got rich by watching people. Marley, I watch how they treat the waiter. I watch how they treat the janitor. I watch what they do when they think no one who matters is looking. It tells you everything you need to know about their risk profile. It tells you if they are honest." He tapped a finger on the table. "I have been watching Ronan Mercer for 8 months. I knew his numbers didn't add up. I knew he was running a shell game with the maintenance contracts, but I didn't know he was rotting from the inside out until I met him, until he invited me to his table and tried to make me feel small." "He has no idea," I whispered. "No," Dad said. "He thinks I am a truck driver, and I am fine with that, because when the truck hits him, he won't see it coming." He pointed to the card in my hand. "Keep that hidden, but know that it is there. You do what your lawyer says. You protect yourself legally, but don't worry about the money, Marley, and don't worry about the house. They are playing a game with a deck of cards I bought a long time ago." "They are going to ask me to sign the papers soon," I said. "Let them ask," Dad said. "Let them get confident. Let them think they have won. The audit team is already in place. I signed the authorization this morning. That blue ink you saw on my thumb, that was me initiating a forensic review of the entire Marrow and Pike executive branch." He smiled. But it wasn't his usual warm smile. It was a smile of anticipation. "They wanted a show," Dad said. "They wanted to show off their wealth to the poor relations. Well, I am going to give them a show, but the ending is going to be a little different than they expect." I looked at the card again. Davis Holdings. I looked at my dad. He was eating his cherry pie, looking for all the world like a man without a care. "You are incredible," I said. "I am just a guy who does his job," he said. "Now eat your pie. You are going to need your strength. Being a spy in your own house is exhausting work." I took a bite of the pie. It was sweet, tart, and real. It tasted like home, and for the first time since the dinner, I didn't feel afraid. I felt dangerous. I slipped the card into my bra, right next to my heart. "Okay, Dad," I said. "Let us burn them down." "Not burn," he corrected me gently. "Liquidate. We are businessmen. Marley, we don't destroy, we just correct the market inefficiencies." He winked, and in that wink, I saw the end of the Mercer dynasty. 3 days after my lunch with Dad at the diner, I stood in the lobby of the Marrow and Pike Management Headquarters. The building was a towering monolith of glass and steel in the center of the financial district, designed to make anyone standing at its base feel insignificant. 2 weeks ago, I would have walked in here feeling like an imposter. clutching my purse tight and hoping no one noticed my department store shoes. But today, I walked in with the invisible weight of Davis Holdings in my pocket. I looked at the marble floors and the security guards and the massive digital ticker tape running across the wall. And I didn't see power. I saw an asset that was about to undergo a hostile correction. The event was billed as a quarterly recognition ceremony, but in reality, it was a coronation for the inner circle. Dylan was being honored as a rising star, a title that came with a plaque and, presumably, the justification for the partnership buy-in he was desperately trying to force me to fund. The ballroom on the 40th floor was filled with men in suits that cost more than my first car and women who looked like they had been curated rather than born. The air smelled of expensive cologne and fear. Despite the champagne and the laughter, there was a tension vibrating underneath the floorboards. I could hear it in the hushed conversations near the bar. "Have you heard about the restructuring?" a man with gray hair whispered to his colleague as I passed by. "Rumor is the parent company is sending in a reaper," the colleague replied. "Some new directive from the top. They are freezing external hires." I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and made my way toward the center of the room, where the Mercers were holding court. Ronan was standing near a floor-to-ceiling window, gesturing expansively to a group of junior executives who hung on his every word. He looked flush, his face slightly red from alcohol and adrenaline. Gwen stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her eyes scanning the room for threats or opportunities. "It is a done deal," Ronan was saying, his voice booming enough to override the jazz quartet playing in the corner. "We have the inside track on the Metro Revitalization Project. I pulled a few strings with our contacts at the municipal level. You know how it is. It is not what you know. It is who picks up your phone calls." He laughed, a wet, self-satisfied sound. "But what about the Oversight Committee?" one of the junior executives asked nervously. "I heard Brightwell is tightening the leash on procurement." Ronan waved his hand dismissively. "Brightwell is a sleeping giant. They don't look at the granular details. As long as the quarterly dividends check out, they leave the real work to us. Besides, I have internal leverage. We are essential. They can't cut the people who bring in the gold." I took a sip of my water to hide my smile. He truly believed he was untouchable. He had no idea that the sleeping giant was currently driving a 10-year-old sedan and eating cherry pie while reading every single one of Ronan's doctored expense reports. Gwen spotted me. She detached herself from Ronan's arm and glided over, her smile tight and predatory. "Marley," she said, "you look appropriate. That dress is almost professional." "Thank you, Gwen," I said. "It is good to see you." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Dylan is very anxious tonight. This award means a great deal to the family legacy." "I know," I said. "He has worked hard." "It is not just about hard work," Gwen corrected me, her voice dropping to a hiss. "It is about positioning. We have spent decades building the right alliances. We have friends in human resources who can make a career disappear with a single email or fast-track a promotion with a signature. It is a delicate ecosystem." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "You are part of that ecosystem now. Marley, you benefit from our protection. But protection requires loyalty. Dylan tells me you are hesitating on the financial restructuring." "I am just reading the fine print," I said. "There is no fine print in family," Gwen snapped. "You either trust the people who elevated you, or you don't. And if you don't, well, human resources isn't the only department where we have influence. Just remember who put you in this room." She patted my arm, a gesture that felt more like a pinch, and turned back to the party. I felt a hand on my waist. It was Dylan. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his eyes were frantic. He was sweating slightly at the temples. "You made it," he said. "Mom said she was talking to you. Is everything okay?" "She was just explaining the family influence," I said. Dylan steered me away from the crowd, toward a quiet alcove near the emergency exit. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Look, Marley," he said, his voice urgent. "I need you to sign those papers tomorrow. The window is closing. Ronan says if I don't deposit the buy-in by Friday, they might offer the partnership to someone else, someone with more liquidity. $200,000 is a lot of money. Dylan, I said, it is everything I have. It is an investment, he insisted. If this goes smoothly, my parents are set, we are set. The salary bump alone will pay it back in 3 years. You just need to cooperate. Why are you making this so hard? Because it is my house, I said. It is the only thing I own that is just mine. Dylan's face darkened. The charm evaporated, leaving behind the ugly entitlement I had seen at the dinner table. Yours, he scoffed. Do you really think you would have that house, or this life, or be standing in this room, if it wasn't for me? You were a project manager. Marley? Nobody. I brought you up. I introduced you to people. You owe my family because I married you. My hand was in my purse. I had pressed the record button on my phone the moment he pulled me aside. I owe you, I repeated, making sure my voice was clear. So my assets are payment for the privilege of being a Mercer. Yes, Dylan hissed. That is how marriage works in the real world. It is a merger, and you are the junior partner. Stop acting like you have a choice. If you don't sign those papers, you are tanking my career. And if my career goes down, you go down with it. I see, I said. I didn't realize it was a transaction. Everything is a transaction, he said coldly. Now fix your face. They are about to call my name. He adjusted his cufflinks and walked back toward the stage, leaving me standing in the alcove. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. Then I emailed it to Carmen and to the secure server Dad had set up for me. I walked back into the main room, but I didn't return to the crowd. I moved along the perimeter, near the hallway that led to the executive conference rooms. The doors were open, presumably to show off the sleek, modern architecture of the office. I glanced into the main boardroom. It was a cavernous space with a table that looked like it was cut from a single slab of obsidian. On the wall, there was a large digital screen displaying the schedule for the upcoming week. It was likely left on by mistake, or perhaps they were just too arrogant to think anyone would look. I scanned the list: Monday regional sales review, Tuesday vendor negotiations, Wednesday W.H. budget approval, closed session. I froze. W.H. I walked back to where Dylan was accepting congratulations from a group of investors. He was beaming, shaking hands, playing the part of the golden boy. I waited for a lull in the conversation. Dylan, I said, pointing toward the hallway. I was just looking for the restroom and I saw the schedule. Who is W? They are approving the budget on Wednesday. Dylan laughed, but his eyes darted nervously toward his father. Oh, that, he said, lowering his voice. That is just a formality. W.H. is the signature code for the holding trust. It stands for, I don't know, World Holdings or something generic like that. It is just some old guy in an office somewhere who rubber stamps whatever my dad sends him. He is a ghost. He doesn't even know what he's signing. Just some old guy, I repeated, and he signs the paychecks. He signs the authorization, Dylan said, but we spend the money. That is the beauty of it. He is the bank, but we are the drivers. Why do you care? Just curious, I said. It must be nice to have a ghost paying your bills. It is the best setup in the world, Dylan grinned. Now come on, they are serving the cake. I watched him walk away. He truly believed it. He believed that the entity at the top of the food chain was a senile, absent figurehead. He believed that W.H. was a rubber stamp. I knew better. W. wasn't World Holdings. I remembered the notebook my father carried, the cheap, black notebook where he wrote down everything. I remembered the name written on the inside cover, in his neat, block lettering, William Henry Davis. Frank was his middle name, the name he used for the world, but on legal documents, on deeds, and on the birth certificate of his only daughter. He was William Henry, W.H. was my father, and on Wednesday, he wasn't going to be rubber stamping a budget, he was going to be executing a slaughter. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just using me for money, they were using me as a bridge loan. They needed my $200,000 to plug the hole in their finances, just long enough to pass the formality of the Wednesday review. Once the budget was approved and the ghost signed off, they would have access to the corporate funds again. And once they had that, they wouldn't need me. Dylan had a loan at 18% interest. He was desperate. He needed my cash to pay off his shark, and then he would use the new corporate budget to refill his own pockets. And I would be left with a refinanced mortgage and a husband who had already told me I was nothing but a junior partner. They were going to bleed me dry and then discard me. I looked at the cake being served. It was a towering white confection, beautiful and perfect. Gwen was cutting the first slice, laughing as she handed it to Ronan. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. Replacing the fear, I touched the phone in my purse. I had the recording. I had the emails. And now, I had the timeline. Wednesday, I had 48 hours to make sure that when William Henry Davis walked into that room, he had more than just a red pen. I needed to make sure he had the ammunition to bury them. I walked over to Dylan. "I am not feeling well," I said. "I am going to head home." "Now," he complained. "The speeches haven't even started." "I need to rest," I said, forcing a weak smile. "I want to be fresh for tomorrow, so I can go to the bank and get those papers sorted." Dylan's face lit up. Greed was such an easy emotion to manipulate. "Okay," he said, kissing my cheek. "Go rest. You're doing the right thing. Marley, for the family." "Yes," I said. "For the family." I turned and walked out of the ballroom, past the security guards, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, shutting out the sound of the Mercer victory party, I finally allowed myself to smile. They were waiting for a check. They were getting a reckoning. The next morning, the air in St. Louis felt heavy, charged with the kind of static that precedes a severe thunderstorm. I told Dylan I was going to the bank to sort out the paperwork for the refinance. He kissed me on the cheek, his eyes bright with the anticipation of a $200,000 influx of cash, and left for the office. He thought he had won. He thought I was capitulating. I waited until his car turned the corner. Then I got into my own vehicle and drove in the opposite direction. I wasn't going to the bank. I was going to a nondescript industrial park near the airport, a place of gray warehouses and unmarked office suites that looked utterly boring to the naked eye. This was the operational heart of Davis Holdings. When I walked into the suite number Dad had texted me, I expected a dusty maintenance office. Instead, I stepped into a room that hummed with quiet, high-tech efficiency. There were servers blinking in the corner, whiteboards covered in complex flowcharts, and a large table covered in documents. Dad was there, standing by the window, but he wasn't alone. Sitting at the table was a man who looked to be in his early 30s. He wore a suit that was sharp, modern, and decidedly not from a department store. He was typing furiously on a laptop, his eyes darting across 3 different monitors. "Marley," Dad said, turning around. He looked different here. The slouch he adopted around the Mercers was gone. He stood tall. "This is Noah Kessler. He is the lead internal auditor for Brightwell Facilities Group." Noah stopped typing and stood up. He didn't offer a limp handshake like Ronan. His grip was firm, professional. "Ms. Davis," Noah said, "your father speaks highly of your attention to detail." "Call me Marley," I said, "and please tell me you have found something." "We have found a lot more than something," Noah said, gesturing for me to sit. "We have found a hemorrhage." He tapped a key, and the large monitor on the wall sprang to life. It displayed a complex web of transactions, lines of red connecting Marrow and Pike management to various external entities. "We have been tracking the operational budget for the Midwest region for 6 months, Noah explained, his voice clinical. "On the surface, the books look clean. The expenses match the revenue, but when you drill down into the vendor contracts, things get ghostly." "Ghostly?" I asked. "Ghost costs," Noah clarified. We have dozens of invoices for preventative maintenance on HVAC systems in buildings that were demolished 2 years ago. We have bills for landscaping services on properties that are paved parking lots. And we have consulting fees paid to firms that have no web presence, no employees, and no history. I stared at the screen. Ronan, I whispered. He is inventing expenses. He is siphoning capital, Dad corrected, his voice hard. He creates a fake problem, hires a fake company to fix it, signs the check, and the money circles right back into his pocket. And he is getting sloppy, Noah added. Usually, guys like this are careful. They keep the amount small, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. But in the last quarter, the amounts have spiked. 50,000, 75,000. My stomach lurched. 75,000, I repeated. That is the exact amount of the loan Dylan took out, the one with the 18% interest rate. It fits, Noah said, nodding. They are over-leveraged. They are stealing from the company to pay personal debts. But the hole is getting deeper faster than they can shovel cash into it. That is why they need your house. Marley, they need a clean injection of private funds to balance the books before the W.H. audit closes tomorrow. I reached into my bag and pulled out the flash drive containing the emails and the recording from the party. I have something that might help connect the dots, I said, sliding the drive across the table to Noah. Noah plugged it in. We listened to the recording of Dylan in the alcove. You owe my family because I married you. It is a merger. If you don't sign those papers, you are tanking my career. The voice filled the room, petulant, arrogant, and incriminating. Noah's face remained impassive, but his jaw tightened. Dad didn't look at the screen. He looked at me. His eyes filled with a profound sadness that I had been subjected to this, mixed with a fierce pride that I had the presence of mind to capture it. This is excellent, Noah said, stopping the recording. Legally, this establishes coercion, but financially, it is the smoking gun. He admits that his career, and by extension, the company's stability is dependent on this personal influx of cash. It proves that Marrow and Pike is insolvent without external, unauthorized funding. Noah opened the folder of emails I had photographed. He zoomed in on one of the attachments Ronan had sent Dylan a projected budget for the upcoming quarter. Look at this, Noah said, pointing to a line item. Strategic advisory retainer paid to a company called Apex Logistics LLC, $5,000 a month for the last 3 years. Apex Logistics, I read. Sounds legitimate. It does, Noah said. Until you run the tax ID, it is a shell, but look at the registered address for the LLC. He pulled up a map view on the screen. The address was a building in a strip mall in Clayton. I know that place, I said, squinting at the image. That is Wait. I leaned closer. The street view showed a luxury fitness center with frosted glass windows and a valet stand out front. That is the Ironclad Gym, I said. Ronan goes there every morning. He says it is where he does his best thinking. He is literally paying his gym membership and listing it as a corporate consulting fee. Dad asked, sounding almost impressed by the audacity. It is worse, Noah said. He is paying rent to the gym's owner through this LLC. I am betting if we subpoena the gym's records, we will find kickbacks going into a private account under Ronan's name. He is laundering money through his treadmill time. I sat back, stunned. It was so petty. They acted like titans of industry. But they were just common thieves. They stole from the company to buy status symbols. And then they mocked my father for working an honest job. We have enough, Noah said, turning to Dad. We have the fake invoices. We have the shell companies. We have the admission of insolvency from his son. And we have the connection to the personal loan. Noah picked up a thick document from the table. It was bound in a blue folder with the Brightwell logo embossed on the front. This is the executive summary for tomorrow's meeting, Noah said. It recommends the immediate termination of the Marrow and Pike executive team, a full forensic asset recovery, and a referral to the district attorney for embezzlement. He slid the document toward my father. We just need the authorization. Mr. Davis, once you sign this, the lockout begins. Their keycards will stop working at 8 in the morning. Their accounts will be frozen. The servers will be seized. I watched Dad. He stood there, looking at the folder. This was the man who had clipped coupons to buy my school clothes. This was the man who drove a car until the wheels fell off to save money. This was the man Gwen Mercer had worried would dirty her guest towels. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his pen. It wasn't a Mont Blanc. It was the same cheap, plastic ballpoint pen he always used. He clicked the top. Click, clack. He placed his hand on the document. "Do it," Dad said softly. "They hurt my daughter, and they stole from my people. Shut them down." He signed his name, William Henry Davis. The signature was bold, decisive. As he lifted the pen, I looked at his hand. There, on the side of his thumb, was a fresh smudge of dark blue ink. It was the same mark I had seen at the dinner table. The memory of that night came rushing back, Gwen sneering at his hands, calling them dirty. She had thought the ink was grime. She had thought it was the mark of a laborer, a man who didn't know how to keep himself clean. She was wrong. It was the mark of the king. It was the mark of the man who signed the checks that paid for her leased Mercedes, her imported wine, and the roof over her head. I reached out and touched his hand. His skin was rough, calloused from years of turning wrenches, but beneath the roughness, there was a power that the Mercers could never understand. "You really are W.H., I whispered. Dad looked at me and winked. "I told you, Marley, I fix things. Sometimes you fix a leak with a wrench. Sometimes you fix a leak with a signature." He handed the folder back to Noah. "Execute the order," Dad said, "but don't freeze the accounts until 11:30 tomorrow. I want them in that conference room. I want them to think they have gotten away with it. I want to see their faces when the lights go out." "Understood, sir," Noah said, closing the folder. Dad turned to me. "You have a role to play too. Marley, you need to go home. You need to tell Dylan that you are waiting on the bank. Stall him until the meeting. Can you do that?" "I can do better than that," I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. "I will tell him I am bringing the papers to the office tomorrow. I will tell him I want to hand them over in person to celebrate his big promotion." "Perfect," Dad said. I stood up to leave. As I walked to the door, I looked back at the screen, at the web of red lines that mapped out the Mercer family's greed. They had spent years building a house of cards, thinking they were immune to the wind. They didn't know that the hurricane was named Frank. I drove home with the window down, the wind whipping my hair. I felt lighter than I had in years. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. When I walked into the house, Dylan was waiting for me. He looked anxious. "Did you go to the bank?" he asked, jumping up from the couch. "I did," I lied smoothly. "They are drawing up the final documents. I will pick them up in the morning. I thought maybe I could bring them to the office around noon. We could sign them together, right before your big budget meeting, as a show of support." Dylan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He hugged me, his relief palpable. "That is perfect, Marley," he said into my hair. "That is absolutely perfect. My parents are going to be so happy. You are saving us." "I know," I said, hugging him back, my eyes open and cold. "I am going to give you exactly what you deserve." He had no idea that the papers I was bringing weren't a loan agreement. They were a death warrant for his career. And the man signing them wasn't a banker. It was the man he had called a janitor. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. The chaos began at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't there to see the first domino fall, but the vibrations of the impact reached me almost immediately. I was sitting in my car, parked 2 blocks away from the Marrow and Pike building, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. I was technically on my way to deliver the loan documents, the lie I had fed Dylan to keep him calm. But in reality, I was waiting for the show my father had promised. My phone lit up at 8:15. It was Dylan. "Marley, where are you?" His voice was tight, bordering on hysterical. Background noise roared behind him, shouting, phones ringing, the frantic energy of a hive that had just been kicked. I am just parking, I said, keeping my voice level. I have the papers. What is wrong? Do not come up yet, he hissed. Something is happening. The whole system is down. Dad can't log in. I can't access the shared drive. Security is swarming the 42nd floor. Maybe it is just a server glitch, I suggested innocently. It is not a glitch, Dylan snapped. It says our credentials have been revoked. Revoked, Marley. And there is a memo circulating from Brightwell Corporate. They are calling it a strategic pause for compliance review. They are suspending access for the entire executive leadership team. I smiled at my reflection in the rearview mirror. That sounds serious, Dylan. But surely it is just a mistake. Your father said he had internal leverage. I don't know, he shouted, then lowered his voice. Just stay close. I might need you to call someone. Call who? I don't know. One of your contacts. You worked in operations. You know the vendor side. Maybe you know who is running this audit. Just be ready. He hung up. I waited another 10 minutes. Watching the front entrance of the building, I saw a few people walking out looking confused, clutching briefcases. Then, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Dylan. It was Gwen. What did you do? She screamed. There was no greeting, no preamble, just raw, unadulterated venom. Gwen, I asked, feigning confusion. I don't understand. I am just sitting in my car. Don't play the fool with me, she shrieked. Ronan is locked out of his office. His keycard wouldn't work. The security guard, some nobody named Steve, who we gave a Christmas bonus to last year, wouldn't let him pass the turnstile. He said Ronan Mercer is on the do not admit list. My husband, on a do not admit list. That must be a misunderstanding, I said. It is sabotage, Gwen ranted. And it is funny how this happens the very morning you are supposed to bring the money. Did you talk to someone? Did you go to the bank and run your mouth about Dylan's loan? Did you flag something? I went to the bank to get the refinance papers. Gwen, I said calmly, just like you wanted. I didn't say a word about anything else. Why would I? I am trying to help the family. Remember, you had better be, she hissed. Because if I find out you whispered a single word to anyone outside this circle, I will make sure you are destitute. We elevated you. Marley, we can bury you. I know, Gwen, I said. You have told me that many times. She hung up, likely to scream at a maid or kick a dog. She was flailing. She sensed the water rising, but she was too arrogant to realize the ship had already sunk. I finally walked into the building around 9:30. The lobby was buzzing with rumors. I took the elevator up to the reception area of Marrow and Pike. The atmosphere was funereal. The receptionists were whispering behind their hands. Dylan found me near the water cooler. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His tie was crooked, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. Marley, thank God, he said, grabbing my arm. He pulled me into a small, glass-walled meeting room that was currently empty. It is a bloodbath. They escorted Dad out of the building. Administrative leave pending investigation. That is what they called it. They took his laptop. Oh, Dylan, I said, widening my eyes. That is terrible. It is a mistake, Dylan said, pacing the small room. It has to be. Dad says it is a power play by someone at Brightwell. But listen, I need you to do something for me. You know people in the industry, right? You have those little networking groups you go to. I have colleagues. Yes, I said. Call them, Dylan pleaded. Find out who is running the audit team. If we can get a name, Dad can pull strings. We just need to know who the enemy is. You are good at digging up details. Use that whatever it is you do. I looked at him, even in his desperation. He couldn't help but belittle me. Whatever it is you do. As if my career was a hobby. Dylan, I said softly, I am just a project manager. I don't have any power. You and your father have always made that very clear. I am just the girl who married up. Right? What could I possibly do against a giant like Brightwell? He stopped pacing and looked at me with frustration. For once in your life, Marley, Try to be useful. Just ask around. Please. Before I could answer, the door to the meeting room opened. A woman in a charcoal suit stood there. I recognized her immediately. She was the director of human resources for the division. Usually, she only spoke to Dylan to approve his bonuses. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice icy. "We need to see you in the conference room. Immediately." "I am in the middle of a conversation with my wife," Dylan said, trying to summon some of his usual authority. "It wasn't a request," the woman said. "And bring your phone. Company policy regarding data preservation during an active audit." Dylan went pale. He looked at me, panic flaring in his eyes. "I will be right back," he stammered. He followed the woman out. I waited a beat, then walked casually toward the hallway. Lingering near the open door of the HR suite, I couldn't hear everything, but the walls were thin enough to catch the highlights. "Mr. Mercer," a male voice said from inside, "we have flagged several irregularities in your communication logs, specifically unauthorized dissemination of internal financial data to non-employee parties, and a disturbing email thread regarding the leveraging of spousal assets to cover undeclared personal liabilities." "That was private," I heard Dylan stutter. "That was family business. You used a company server." "Mr. Mercer," the voice replied, "there is no such thing as private. You are hereby placed on unpaid suspension effective immediately. Please hand over your badge." I walked away before Dylan came out. I didn't want him to see me smiling. I went back to my car and drove home. By the time I walked through the front door of the townhouse, the dynamic had shifted completely. My phone had been blowing up with texts from both Gwen and Dylan. The texts weren't angry anymore. They were pleading. "Marley, darling, I was so stressed earlier. I didn't mean to snap. Please come over for dinner tonight. We need to stick together. Gwen, babe, please pick up. I'm coming home. We need to talk. I love you." Dylan. They were terrified. With Ronan locked out and Dylan suspended, their cash flow was effectively severed. They needed my $200,000 more than they needed air. The refinance was their only lifeline left. They thought if they could just get me to sign the papers, they could pay off the debts, weather the suspension, and claw their way back to power. I let them stew for 3 hours. Then, I replied to Gwen, "I will come to dinner. We should talk about the future." When I arrived at the Mercer estate that evening, the change in atmosphere was palpable. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, brittle hospitality. Ronan was home, wearing a cashmere sweater instead of a suit, pacing the living room with a tumbler of scotch. He looked 10 years older than he had at the party. "Marley," Ronan boomed when I entered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So good to see you. Come in, come in. Can I get you a drink? Maybe a glass of that wine your father likes. I think we have a bottle of something approachable." It was a clumsy attempt to be nice, but the insult was still baked into the crust. "Water is fine," I said. Gwen came out of the kitchen. She wasn't floating today. She was rushing. She held a small gift bag. "For you," she said, thrusting it into my hands. "I saw this scarf at the boutique today and thought of you. It brings out your eyes. Open it." I opened the bag. It was a silk scarf, undoubtedly expensive, but it was from last season's collection, a leftover, just like they thought I was. "It is beautiful, Gwen," I said. "Thank you." "We are family," Gwen said, gripping my shoulders, her nails dug in. "And families help each other during hard times. Ronan is the victim of a corporate witch hunt. Marley, jealousy, that is all it is. But we will beat it. We just need to secure our position." "The refinance," Dylan said, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway. He looked defeated, stripped of his armor. "Did you get the papers?" "I have them," I said. I patted my purse. "I have everything we need." "Thank God," Ronan breathed. "You are a good girl, Marley. I always said you were practical. Once we deposit that capital, we can pay off the bridge loans and hire a legal team to fight this suspension. We will be back on top in a month." I am sure you will, I said. Actually, I was hoping we could finalize everything tomorrow. At the office, I know you are suspended, but I arranged a meeting with the auditor. The room went deadly silent. You what? Ronan whispered. I made a call, I said, shrugging. Like Dylan asked, I used my little network. It turns out I do know someone connected to the audit team. They agreed to meet with us, to hear your side of the story. They said if you can explain the discrepancies, the suspension might be lifted immediately. Hope is a cruel thing. I watched it bloom on Ronan's face, ugly and desperate. He didn't question how I had done it. He was too narcissistically attached to the idea that he could talk his way out of anything. He thought he just needed a room and an audience. That is brilliant, Ronan said. I knew you had potential. Marley, who is it? Who are we meeting? The head of the Oversight Committee, I said. He is flying in tomorrow. We are meeting in the main conference room at 11:30. I will be there, Ronan said, straightening his spine. I will bring the charts. I will show them the projections. I will make them understand that Marrow and Pike is nothing without me. I am sure they will understand exactly what you are worth, I said. I excused myself early, claiming I needed to prepare for the meeting. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Carmen Delaney, my lawyer. Subject draft petition for dissolution of marriage. The body of the email was short. Everything is ready. The restraining order, the asset freeze, the divorce filing. We just need the signal to file. Choose your stage. Marley, make sure the lighting is good. I looked back at the Mercer house. The lights were blazing in every window, burning electricity they could no longer afford. They were inside, toasting their good luck, thinking they had manipulated me one last time. They didn't know that the stage was already built, the trapdoor was oiled, and the hangman was already in town. Checking into his hotel under the name William Henry, I got into my car and texted my father. They took the bait. 11:30. Do not be late. His reply came 10 seconds later. I am never late. I am just on time. I drove away into the night. The silence in the car wasn't lonely anymore. It was the heavy, pregnant silence of a courtroom right before the gavel falls. The townhouse was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that screams. It was 11 o'clock at night. The refinance papers, which were actually just a stack of blank printer paper I had placed inside a crisp manila folder, sat on the coffee table like a loaded gun. Dylan was pacing the length of the living room, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, the ice clinking with a rhythmic, irritating sound that grated on my nerves. He had been talking for 20 minutes, a rambling monologue about loyalty, legacy, and the unfairness of the universe. He was trying to work himself up to the ask. He was trying to justify the theft he was about to commit. It is just a temporary liquidity issue, Dylan said, stopping in front of the fireplace and turning to face me. That is what you need to understand. Marley, the suspension. It is political. Dad says once we show the auditors that our personal assets are solid, that we are not over-leveraged, the whole investigation goes away. We just need to show a strong balance sheet. I sat on the sofa, my legs crossed, watching him. And how does my house fix your balance sheet? Dylan? It is not your house, he snapped, the alcohol making his temper flare faster than usual. We are married. What is mine is yours. What is yours is ours. That is the law. Actually, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Since I bought this property 3 years before we met, and since we have kept the deed in my name, it is very much mine. That is the law. He waved his hand dismissively, spilling a drop of amber liquid onto the rug. Details. The point is, there is $400,000 of equity sitting in these walls, doing nothing, dead capital. If we refinance, pull out $200,000, I can buy into the partnership. That money goes into the firm, stabilizes the accounts, and proves we are solvent. Then, when the stock rebounds, we pay off the mortgage. It is simple math. It sounds like gambling, I said. It is finance, he shouted. God, you are so risk-averse. This is how wealth is built. You leverage what you have to get what you need. Why are you fighting me on this? Do you want me to fail? Do you want my father to go to jail because of some clerical error? Is it a clerical error, Dylan? I asked. Or is it debt? He froze. What? I asked if it was debt, personal debt. I don't have personal debt. He lied. He looked me straight in the eye and lied with the ease of a man who had been practicing his whole life. We pay off the credit cards every month. You see the statements. I see the statements that come to this house, I said. I reached under the cushion of the sofa and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't the blank paper from the folder. It was the copy of the loan document I had retrieved from the public records, the one Carmen had helped me authenticate. I placed it on top of the manila folder. $75,000, I read aloud. Originated 6 months ago. Interest rate, 18%. Lender, Apex Private Capital. A predatory lender known for high-risk, unsecured loans. Dylan stared at the paper, his face drained of color, leaving him looking gray and sickly in the lamplight. And here is the interesting part, I continued, pointing to the header. Billing address, 4200 Kingsbury Lane, your parents' house. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Why is your mother receiving the bills for a $75,000 loan that I don't know about? Dylan. For a moment, I thought he might cry. I thought he might fall to his knees and apologize, confess everything, and beg for my forgiveness. I was prepared for pity. But I had underestimated the Mercer entitlement. Dylan's shock morphed instantly into rage. He slammed his glass down on the mantelpiece so hard, I worried it would crack. You have been spying on me, he accused, his voice shaking. You went behind my back. You dug through my personal history. Who do you think you are? I am the woman you are trying to defraud, I said, standing up to meet his gaze. You weren't going to put that money into the firm, were you? You were going to pay off this shark before they broke your legs, and then you were going to use the rest to plug the hole Ronan dug in the company accounts. So what if I was? Dylan screamed. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists. It is my money, I earned it. I work 60 hours a week to give you this lifestyle, to let you play project manager while I handle the real business. If I have debt, it is because keeping up appearances costs money. You wouldn't understand that. You are happy with coupon clipping and cheap wine. But in my world, you have to spend to stay relevant. Your world is a lie, Dylan, I said, and I am not mortgaging my future to pay for your costumes. You have to, he bellowed. You are my wife. You signed a contract if I go down. You go down. Do you think you can just walk away if I default on this? If the company goes under, we lose everything. Your precious townhouse will be seized by creditors anyway. You are trapped, Marley, so just sign the damn papers and save us both. No, I said. The word hung in the air. Simple and absolute. Dylan looked at me with pure hatred. You are useless, he spat. My mother was right. You are a millstone. We brought you in. We cleaned you up. And this is how you repay us, by holding out on us. My phone rang. It was lying on the coffee table. The screen lit up with the name, Gwen Mercer. Dylan looked at the phone, then at me. Answer it, he commanded. Tell her you are signing. I picked up the phone. I swiped answer and put it on speaker. I held it out so the microphone could catch everything. Marley, Gwen's voice shrilled through the room. She sounded drunk and vicious. Dylan says you are stalling. He texted me. What is wrong with you? I found the loan. Gwen, I said. The $75,000. The one you have been hiding. There was a pause on the line, a beat of silence where a normal person would feel shame. Gwen Mercer just felt anger. So, she snapped, everyone has leverage. It is part of the game. Stop acting like a moral authority. You are a nobody. Marley, you are a little girl from South City who got lucky. I am the one with the assets, I reminded her. You have nothing, Gwen screamed. We gave you value. We let you sit at our table. We let you use our name. And now, when we ask for a small return on our investment, you want to play hardball. Listen to me, you ungrateful little stray. We raised you up. We made you legitimate. And we can drag you down. We can ruin your reputation in this town so thoroughly you won't be able to get a job scrubbing toilets. Sign the papers, or I swear to God, I will destroy you. I looked at the recording app running in the background of my phone. The waveform was spiking beautifully with every threat. Is that a threat, Gwen? I asked, my voice steady. Are you threatening to destroy me if I don't give you $200,000? It is a promise, Gwen hissed. Do not test us. You don't know who we are. You are right, I said. I didn't know who you were, but I do now. I hung up. I looked at Dylan. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at the phone, then at the folder, and finally at me. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't scared. I wasn't crying. I was documenting. You recorded that, he whispered. I record everything now. I said, Carmen Delaney has the file, and she has the loan documents, and she has the emails. Dylan slumped onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. You are destroying my family, he moaned. Why are you doing this? I am not destroying anything, I said. I am just turning on the lights. If the room is dirty, that is not the fault of the light switch. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a suitcase I had packed 2 days ago. I wheeled it to the door. Where are you going? Dylan asked, looking up. Ideally, to a hotel, I said. But practically, I am leaving a crime scene. You can't leave, he said weakly. We have the meeting tomorrow. The auditor. You said you set it up. You said you could fix this. The meeting is still happening, I said. 11:30. Don't be late. I will bring the papers. You will. Hope, pathetic and blind, flickered in his eyes again. You will bring the refinance papers. I will bring the papers that need to be signed, I said enigmatically. I walked out of the townhouse. The cold night air hit my face, and I inhaled deeply. It smelled of rain and freedom. I got into my car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump of finally saying the word no to people who had never heard it before. I drove a few blocks away and parked in a well-lit pharmacy lot. I needed a moment. My phone buzzed. It was Dad. Frank, I heard the audio you uploaded to the server. Gwen has a loud voice. I smiled. Tears pricking my eyes. Marley. She does. She thinks she owns this town. Frank, she owns a lot of debt and a bad attitude. That is about it. A moment later, his number flashed on the screen. I answered. Hey, Dad, I said. You did good, kid. His voice was warm, grounding. You stood your ground. That is the hardest part. The rest is just paperwork. I am tired. Dad, I admitted. I am so tired of their noise. I know, he said. That is why we end it tomorrow. But I have a question for you. A serious one. What is it? Tomorrow morning, when we walk into that conference room, I can handle it. I can have Noah read the findings. I can have security escort them out. And you don't have to say a word. You can sit there and watch. Or, he paused. Or you can be the one to tell them. You can be the one to introduce me. You can be the one to drop the hammer. It is your story, Marley. I am just the funding. How do you want to play it? I looked out the window at the empty parking lot. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about the way Gwen looked at my father's shoes. I thought about Dylan calling me a junior partner. I thought about the 18% interest rate and the way they had tried to strip mine my life to fill their hollow souls. They had silenced me for 2 years. They had made me feel small. They had made my father feel small. I didn't want to watch from the sidelines. I didn't want to be a passive observer of my own liberation. I want to do it, I said. I want to tell them. I want them to look at me when they realize who they actually work for. I want them to know that the nobody from South City is the one holding the keys. Good, Dad said. I could hear the smile in his voice. That is my girl. I will meet you in the lobby at 11:25. Wear something sharp." "I will," I said. "And Marley." "Yeah. Get some sleep. You can't conquer Rome with bags under your eyes." He hung up. I took a deep breath. I opened the group chat on my phone, the one titled "A Mercer Family Updates," that Gwen used to coordinate holiday dinners and brag about Ronan's achievements. It had been silent since the explosion earlier in the day. My fingers flew across the keyboard. "Marley, I have arranged the meeting with the senior auditor and the representative of the holding trust. They have agreed to hear your proposal regarding the restructuring and the asset injection. Marley, tomorrow, 11:30 a.m., main conference room at Marrow Pike. All principals must be present. Do not be late." I hit send. Almost immediately, the read receipts appeared. Read by Gwen. Read by Dylan. Read by Ronan. Then, a single reply from Ronan. "Ronan, we will be there. Thank you. Marley, you have saved us." I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the dark car. "No, Ronan," I whispered to the empty air. "I haven't saved you. I have just arranged your funeral." I put the phone down and started the engine. I drove to the hotel, checked in, and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a soldier the night before the final victory. The conference room on the 42nd floor was designed to intimidate. It was a glass cage suspended in the sky, with a view of the St. Louis skyline that usually made men feel like gods. But at 11:30 in the morning on Wednesday, the room felt less like Olympus and more like a holding cell. I walked in precisely on time. The silence that greeted me was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ronan, Gwen, and Dylan were already seated on one side of the long obsidian table. They looked like a tableau of desperate hope. Ronan was wearing his best suit, though his tie was slightly askew. Gwen sat rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Dylan looked at me with the eyes of a drowning man spotting a lifeline. On the other side of the table sat Noah Kessler, the internal auditor, and the director of human resources. They did not look hopeful. They looked like executioners waiting for the signal to drop the blade. "Marley," Ronan said, standing up. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. "You are here, and you brought the necessary documentation." He gestured toward the leather portfolio tucked under my arm. "I did," I said, walking to the head of the table. I didn't sit down. I stood there, looking at them. I wanted to memorize this moment. I wanted to remember exactly how they looked when they still thought they were in control. "Excellent," Ronan said, turning to Noah. "See, I told you this was a misunderstanding. My daughter-in-law has secured the personal liquidity we discussed. This proves that the Mercer family is solvent. We are ready to inject capital to resolve any clerical discrepancies." Noah didn't look at Ronan. He looked at me. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have the financial instruments?" "I have instruments," I said, "but they are not for a refinance." I opened the portfolio. I didn't take out a check. I took out a thick stack of papers clipped together with red binders. I slid the first stack down the table toward Ronan. It hit the polished surface with a heavy, final thud. "What is this?" Ronan asked, his smile faltering. "That is a forensic accounting of Apex Logistics LLC, I said, my voice steady and cold. "Including the lease agreement for the ironclad gym that you have been paying with company funds for 3 years, and the kickbacks deposited into your private Cayman account." Ronan went pale. He looked like he had been slapped. I slid the second stack toward Dylan. "And this," I said, "is a copy of the unsecured loan for $75,000 from Apex Private Capital, billed to your parents' address, along with the email thread where you discuss coercing me into refinancing my premarital home to cover it." Dylan stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. He just shrank back in his chair, as if the paper were radioactive. "And finally," I said, placing a USB drive on the table, "this is a digital record of the threats made by Gwen Mercer last night, promising to destroy my reputation if I did not comply with your extortion attempt." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Gwen stood up. Her face was a mask of fury and panic. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You traitor," she hissed. "We invited you in. We gave you a name. And this is how you repay us, by siding with them." She gestured wildly at the HR director. "We are your family. You are supposed to protect us." Then, seeing that anger wasn't working, she switched tactics in a split second. Her eyes filled with tears. It was a performance worthy of an award. "Marley, please," she sobbed, reaching out a hand. "We made mistakes. We were just trying to secure a future for Dylan, for you. We are all under so much pressure. You don't understand how hard it is. Just take it back. Tell them you forged it. Sign a statement saying it was a misunderstanding. Just sign one piece of paper, and we can fix this. We can be a family again." I looked at her. I looked at the tears that were sliding down her cheeks, staining her expensive foundation. 2 days ago, those tears might have moved me. Today, they just looked like water. "I used to sign things for you because of guilt. Gwen," I said softly. "I signed birthday cards for people I didn't know. I signed checks for dinners I didn't eat. I signed away my dignity bit by bit." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "But today," I said, "I am signing for the truth." "You are nothing," Gwen shrieked, the mask falling away again. "You are a nobody. You have no authority here. Who do you think is going to listen to you over us?" At that exact moment, the double doors at the back of the room opened. It wasn't a tentative opening. It was the wide, confident swing of doors admitting someone who owned the building. 2 security guards stepped in, flanking a man in a gray suit. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He wasn't wearing a designer label. He was wearing a simple, well-fitted suit and holding a clipboard, but the way he walked changed the air pressure in the room. Noah Kessler stood up immediately. The HR director stood up. They buttoned their jackets out of respect. "Mr. Davis," Noah said, "we are ready for you." Ronan turned around, confused. "Davis, who is?" His voice died in his throat. My father walked past Ronan without even looking at him. He walked past Gwen, who was standing with her mouth open. He walked past Dylan, who was staring at the floor. Dad stood next to me at the head of the table. He placed his clipboard down on the obsidian surface. "Frank," Gwen whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "What are you doing here?" "The delivery entrance is in the back." Dad didn't answer her. He pulled his cheap ballpoint pen from his pocket. He clicked it, click-clack. "Noah," Dad said, his voice calm and authoritative. "Is the audit complete?" "Yes, sir," Noah replied. "The findings are conclusive: embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." "Recommendation?" Dad asked. "Immediate termination with cause." Noah said, "Civil suit for restitution of funds, and referral to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." "Approved," Dad said. He flipped the page on his clipboard. He signed his name at the bottom of the document. William Henry Davis. He pressed hard. When he lifted his hand, I saw it. The smudge. The dark blue ink stain on the side of his right thumb. He turned to face the Mercers. Ronan was shaking. He looked at Noah, then at my father. "You called him sir. Why did you call him sir?" "Because he is the chairman of the board." Noah said simply, "Mr. Davis owns Davis Holdings, the majority shareholder of Brightwell Facilities Group. He owns this building. He owns this company. He owns your contracts." Gwen let out a sound that was half gasp, half choke. She grabbed the back of her chair to steady herself. "You," she stammered, "but you fix furnaces. You have dirty hands." Dad looked at his hand. He looked at the ink stain on his thumb. Then he looked Gwen dead in the eye. "I am the man you called a truck driver," Dad said. "I am the man whose shoes you mocked. I am the man you made sit at the end of the table." He took a step closer to her. "And yes, Gwen, I have dirty hands. Do you know why?" She shook her head, terrified. "Because ink is messy," Dad said. "And I signed the checks that paid for your house. I signed the payroll that bought your clothes. I signed the documents that let you sleep at night." "I didn't know," Ronan whispered. Frank, we didn't know. That is the point. Ronan, Dad said, his voice hard as steel. You didn't know who I was, so you treated me like trash. If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me like a king. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. He turned to Noah. Davis Holdings acquired the controlling interest in Marrow and Pike 8 months ago, Dad announced to the room. I kept my name off the letterhead because I wanted to see how the management team operated when they thought no one was watching. I wanted to see if the rumors of corruption were true. He gestured to the stack of evidence I had put on the table. You boys didn't just steal, Dad said. You were sloppy. You were so busy looking down on people like me that you didn't notice we were the ones reading the ledgers. You wrote your own names on the eviction notice. Dad pointed to the door. Security will escort you out. You have 10 minutes to clear your desks. Anything you leave behind belongs to me. Frank, please, Dylan begged, standing up. I am your son-in-law, Marley. Tell him we are family. I stepped forward. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out one last document. It was a single sheet of paper, drafted by Carmen Delaney. We are not family. Dylan, I said. Not anymore. I placed the document on the table in front of him. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. I am filing for divorce, I said, and I am filing for a restraining order. If you or your mother ever contact me again, my lawyer will have you in court so fast your head will spin. And considering you are about to be unemployed and under investigation for fraud, I don't think you can afford the legal fees. I picked up a pen from the table, not my dad's pen, but a fancy Marrow and Pike branded pen that was sitting there. I signed the divorce papers. Then, I dropped the pen on the floor. You can keep the pen, I said. It is the only asset you have left. Dylan looked at the papers, defeated. Ronan was slumped in his chair, staring at a future that held nothing but subpoenas and bankruptcy. Gwen was weeping softly, but no one was looking at her. The tragedy of her social death was total. Let us go, Marley, Dad said. He offered me his arm. I took it. We turned our backs on the Mercer dynasty. We walked toward the double doors. Mr. Davis, Gwen called out, her voice a broken whisper. What are we going to do? Dad stopped. He didn't turn around. He just spoke over his shoulder. I suggest you learn a trade. Gwen, he said. I hear driving a truck pays pretty well. Honest work might do you some good. We walked out of the room. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, sealing off the sound of Gwen's sobbing. We walked through the office, past the staring employees, past the security guards who nodded respectfully at my father. We walked out into the bright sunshine of the St. Louis afternoon. How do you feel? Dad asked as we reached his car. I looked back at the glass tower. I thought about the fear I had felt for 2 years. I thought about the need to be accepted. It was all gone. I feel clean, I said. Dad smiled. He opened the car door for me. Good, he said. Now, let us go get some lunch. I know a place that makes a great sandwich, and the best part is, you don't have to dress up. I got into the car. As we drove away, leaving the Mercers to their ruin, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't the shouting or the drama. It was the silence. It was the quiet, undeniable power of the truth, signed in blue ink by a hand that knew the value of hard work. I was Marley Davis, and I was finally free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on how the Mercers got what they deserved. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Maya Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.